The chandeliers inside the Burnham Ballroom dripped with gold that night. Every inch of the JW Marriott in downtown Chicago shimmered under the light of luxury, the kind that only money and illusion could buy. Guests in black tie, attire moved like a tide of diamonds and champagne as the city's most powerful people gathered for what society columns were already calling the wedding of the year. At 60, Edward Lansing stood at the center of it all, smiling like a man who had conquered both fortune and fate. His tuxedo, custom-tailored from Savile Row, fit him like a second skin. His salt-and-silver hair gleamed under the light, and his voice carried with the charm of a man who'd spent decades commanding boardrooms. To the press, he was Chicago's real estate lion, a self-made billionaire whose developments had transformed forgotten blocks into glass and steel monuments. But tonight, Edward wasn't thinking about business. His eyes were fixed on the woman across the ballroom floor, Clara Monroe, now Mrs. Lansing. She was half his age, yet she carried herself with the grace of someone who had been here all her life. Her deep cocoa-toned skin glowed under the chandeliers. Her wedding gown, a hand-stitched Vera Wang, hugged her form before flowing into a cascade of white silk. Around her neck, a single diamond glimmered, catching the light every time she turned. When the orchestra struck up at last, and Edward extended his hand, the room fell quiet. For a moment, the only sound was the soft rhythm of their steps as the newlyweds danced under the golden ceiling. The crowd sighed as if they were watching a dream unfold. Cameras flashed, wine glasses lifted, and through it all, Clara smiled, radiant, perfect, untouchable. But if anyone had looked closely, they might have seen it, a flicker in her eyes. Not affection, not tenderness, something colder, something rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Samuel Drake, Edward's longtime business partner and best man, raising his glass. "To Edward and Clara, may your love be as tall as the Willis Tower and as deep as Lake Michigan." Laughter rippled through the room. Champagne flutes clinked. A jazz trio began to play, their melody blending seamlessly with the hum of expensive chatter. Yet behind Samuel's practiced smile, there was unease. He had known Edward for 30 years, through deals, divorces, and scandals, and he had never seen his friend so blinded. At the table near the back, Elena Lansing, Edward's 32-year-old daughter, watched the scene with tight lips. She had flown in from Los Angeles that morning, still stunned that her father had remarried so suddenly, and to someone younger than herself. "She's beautiful," whispered a guest beside her. Elena nodded politely, but her stomach twisted. Something about Clara didn't fit. As the night unfolded, every detail felt too perfect. The guest list, meticulously curated. The catering, flawless. Even the speeches sounded like they had been written by a publicist. To everyone else, it was a fairy tale. To Elena, it was theater. Across the ballroom, Clara excused herself from a group of socialites, stepping aside into the hallway. For the first time that evening, her smile faded. She pulled out her phone, typed a brief message, and pressed send. Phase 1 complete. Then, just as quickly, she returned to the crowd, her mask restored. Back inside, Edward raised his glass again, oblivious to the storm already forming around him. To second chances, he toasted. To love that finds you when you least expect it. His voice trembled slightly with emotion. The crowd cheered, and Clara leaned in to kiss him as cameras flashed, sealing the moment forever. What no one saw was the flicker of relief that crossed her face, a silent exhale, as if a move on a chessboard had just been executed perfectly. Later that night, when the band played its final song and guests began to leave, Samuel pulled Edward aside. "She's remarkable," he said carefully. "But are you sure you really know her?" Edward chuckled, brushing him off. "You worry too much, Sam. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Samuel forced a smile, but unease gnawed at him. Behind Clara's charm was something he couldn't define, something that made his instincts scream danger. As the ballroom lights dimmed and the newlyweds disappeared into the elevator leading to their honeymoon suite, the city outside buzzed under the midnight air. Chicago glittered like a jewel, alive, restless, unaware that within 48 hours, This same hotel would become the epicenter of a nightmare. Because what Edward Lansing thought was the happiest night of his life was, in truth, the opening act of his destruction. 6 months before the wedding, the world of Edward Lansing looked nothing like the glittering ballroom it would become. The sky over Millennium Park was the color of pewter, and autumn leaves swirled like dying embers across the stone paths. Edward sat alone on a park bench, his phone dark, his coffee cold. At 60, he had everything a man could buy: towers, yachts, a name etched into Chicago's skyline, but nothing that could fill the hollow echo left by his divorce. He was thinking about the years he'd traded for success when a gust of wind caught a stack of papers from a passing woman's hands. They spiraled upward in a flurry of white and gold. Without thinking, Edward stood, catching several before they hit the puddled pavement. "Oh my God, thank you," the woman exclaimed, breathless, her voice smooth but tinged with urgency. When Edward looked up, he froze. The woman was striking, a deep red coat hugging her curves, her dark hair pulled into neat braids that caught the light, her brown eyes steady and luminous. "No trouble at all," he said, handing her the papers. "These look important." "They are," she smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm working with a housing nonprofit, Haven Hearts. We help low-income families find safe homes." I was on my way to a meeting. Edward's brow lifted. "Real estate, huh? That's my world too. Though I'm afraid I usually build for the other end of the market." Her eyes lit up. "Edward Lansing, right? The developer behind the Fulton Renewal Project?" He chuckled. "Guilty as charged." "That's incredible," she said. "I've been trying to meet someone from your company for months." "It's fate, maybe." He should have seen the line for what it was. Perfectly timed, rehearsed, but loneliness has a way of blurring red flags into romance. They talked for nearly an hour, standing under the bronze archway of the park while the city pulsed around them. Clara Monroe was warm, articulate, and filled with conviction. She spoke about children living in basements, families displaced by rising rent, and her dream of transforming Chicago's forgotten corners into affordable housing. Edward listened, moved by her passion and beauty in equal measure. "You should tell me more about this work," he said at last. "Maybe over dinner?" Her smile was soft, practiced. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Lansing." "Edward," he corrected gently. "Please, call me Edward." She nodded, and for just a second, something flashed behind her eyes, recognition maybe, a shadow, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Their first dinner was at Alinea, the city's most exclusive restaurant. He ordered the chef's tasting menu, and she listened to him speak with the patience of a saint. By dessert, he was enchanted. By the second date, he was infatuated. By the third, he was telling his assistant to clear his evenings. Clara became a constant presence, attending charity galas, sitting beside him at investor dinners, offering insightful opinions on community projects. To everyone else, she was the perfect match: young, intelligent, compassionate, and utterly devoted. Behind closed doors, she studied him. His habits, his passwords, his weaknesses. She noted the way his eyes softened when he talked about legacy, how his voice faltered when he mentioned his ex-wife, how quickly his pride overrode his caution. Each interaction was a thread in a web she was weaving with precision. One evening, standing on his penthouse balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, Edward confessed, "You remind me what it means to care again. I thought I'd lost that part of myself." Clara touched his hand, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "And you remind me that not every man in power forgets the world beneath him." He kissed her then, and in that moment, she knew he was hers completely. But there were others watching too. Samuel Drake, Edward's business partner, began noticing irregular donations. Money funneled into Clara's nonprofit without board approval. When he mentioned it, Edward brushed him off. "It's for a good cause, Sam. Don't be cynical." Still, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen Clara somewhere before, not in charity circles, but in the grainy face of a woman once connected to a federal fraud case. Meanwhile, Edward's daughter Elena visited his penthouse for dinner and found Clara there, wearing her mother's old bracelet, the one Edward swore he'd never give away. "She's beautiful," Elena said stiffly. And you met her where again? In the park, Edward said, smiling. Just fate. Elena forced a smile. Funny thing about fate, Dad. It's unpredictable until it isn't. Outside, the city lights shimmered like watchful eyes over the lake. Inside, Edward poured another glass of wine, blind to the truth staring him in the face. Because Clara Monroe wasn't a chance encounter or a woman in need of saving. She was the storm he had unknowingly invited into his life. And soon, it would sweep everything he'd built into darkness. By winter, the city had frozen over, and Edward Lansing was falling in love. The whirlwind that began with a chance meeting in Millennium Park had turned into a full-blown romance splashed across Chicago's society pages. Wherever Edward went, Clara Monroe was by his side, radiant, composed, and impossibly perfect. They became fixtures at charity galas, fundraisers, and art exhibitions. Photographers loved them, the silver-haired mogul and the young humanitarian in red silk gowns. Chicago Tribune dubbed them the city's golden couple. To Edward, it was validation. For decades, he'd been known as the ruthless developer who built empires and broke unions. But with Clara beside him, people called him something new, a man reborn. And in a way, he was. Every morning, she brewed his coffee before he woke. She left small notes in his briefcase. Proud of you, changed the world today. When he spoke at luncheons, she stood in the crowd, eyes shining with adoration. She made him feel alive again, needed, human. At least, that's what he thought. In truth, Clara was studying him the way a scientist studies a specimen. Every gesture, every password he murmured to his assistant, every key he used to access the upper floors of his offices, she logged them all. She learned his habits, his soft spots, and the quiet guilt he carried about wealth and legacy. When Edward talked about wanting to give back, she listened closely. When he mentioned creating affordable housing to repair his reputation, her heart fluttered, not from love, but opportunity. Maybe, she suggested one night, as they dined in the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Haven Hearts could partner with your firm. We could build something truly meaningful together. Edward looked at her, touched. You know, Clara, that's exactly what I've been thinking. That was the moment she hooked him completely. Within weeks, she convinced him to funnel pilot donations into her nonprofit. Modest amounts at first, then 6 figures, then more. The money flowed quietly into shell accounts under her control. Edward didn't notice. He was too distracted planning their future. He brought her to Aspen for Christmas. She gifted him a framed photograph of them at the park where they first met. He wept. When they returned, he handed her a key to his penthouse. Move in, he said. There's no reason to keep paying rent. She feigned surprise, tears glistening on cue. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he said. And in that moment, the line between conquest and control blurred completely. Friends and family watched in disbelief. Samuel Drake, Edward's partner of 3 decades, pulled him aside one afternoon. Eddie, he said quietly, I know you don't want to hear this, but something about her doesn't add up. Her records, her past. It's like she appeared out of thin air 5 years ago. Edward frowned. Don't start that, Sam. She's done more good for this city than half our board combined. Maybe, or maybe she's playing you. Edward's voice sharpened. You sound jealous. Samuel sighed. No, my friend. I sound old enough to recognize a setup when I see one. But Edward brushed him off. Clara's charm was a shield, and her timing was perfect. Every doubt Samuel raised, Clara softened with affection. When Edward's daughter, Elena, visited that spring, she found Clara sitting at the grand piano, her mother's piano, humming softly. Elena stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You play beautifully, she said coolly. Clara smiled. Your father's been teaching me about your mother. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was, Elena said, her voice flat. She also hated being replaced. That night, Elena confronted her father. You don't even know who she is. Edward slammed his glass down. Enough, Elena. You don't have to like her, but you will respect her. Elena looked at him sadly. Respect her? Dad, she's studying you like a thesis. You just can't see it. He turned away, muttering, You sound just like your mother. A week later, Clara stood on the penthouse balcony, gazing at the glittering skyline. Edward came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Hard to believe I ever felt lonely," he whispered. She leaned into him, smiling faintly. "Maybe loneliness was just the universe preparing you for me." He kissed her hair, and for a moment, all was still, the city, the sky, their breath. But when he turned to pour champagne, Clara's expression changed. She looked down at the reflection of their tower, shimmering on the lake, her smile fading. She wasn't thinking about love. She was thinking about access codes, inheritance law, and the final pieces of a plan that had been set in motion long before that accidental meeting in the park. Soon, everything Edward Lansing owned would belong to her, and he wouldn't even realize it until it was far too late. The night after the wedding, the presidential suite of the JW Marriott glittered like something out of a dream. Rose petals on the bed, champagne chilling in a silver bucket, a skyline of gold lights stretching beyond the glass. Edward Lansing stood at the window, his reflection haloed by the city he had helped build. "To new beginnings," he said softly, raising his glass toward the woman who had just become his wife. Clara Monroe, Mrs. Lansing now, smiled as she walked toward him, the train of her gown whispering against the marble floor. "To new beginnings," she echoed, her voice smooth and warm. But behind that warmth, a storm was brewing. When she clinked her glass against his, her hand didn't tremble. It never did. She had prepared for this moment for months. Every move calculated, every word rehearsed. Tonight was the crescendo of a symphony she had composed in silence. They drank. Edward's glass emptied fast. The champagne was sweet, faintly floral, laced with a few clear drops of a sedative powerful enough to drop a grown man in minutes. "You look tired," Clara said softly, taking the flute from his hand. He smiled, his eyes heavy. "Guess the night caught up to me." "Lie down, love," she whispered. "You deserve to rest." Edward's head swayed as he sank onto the bed. His speech slurred. "Clara, what would I do without you?" "You'll never have to find out." Within seconds, his breathing slowed, the rise and fall of his chest shallow and steady. Clara stood over him for a long moment, watching the man who had trusted her more than anyone since his divorce. She reached out and touched his face, not with affection, but curiosity. "You really did love me," she murmured. "That's almost tragic." Then she turned away. From her suitcase, hidden beneath a layer of silk dresses, she retrieved a small black leather case. Inside, under a cloth, gleamed a set of surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, sutures, the cold precision of a medical kit she had spent weeks assembling. Under different circumstances, it could have belonged to a surgeon. But Clara Monroe was no surgeon. She was about to commit a crime that would leave the city gasping. She snapped on a pair of latex gloves, her movements mechanical, detached. Every step she'd practiced, from positioning the body to controlling the flow of blood. The sedative would hold for hours, long enough to finish and clean up. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air vent and the soft whisper of her own breathing. Then, knock, knock. She froze. "Room service." A man's voice called from behind the door. Her pulse spiked. She hadn't ordered anything. She glanced at the bed. Edward was motionless, eyes closed, the drugs doing their work. "Wrong room," she called out, trying to steady her voice. Silence. Then footsteps fading down the hall. Her jaw tightened. Too close. The plan had to change. The idea had been to let him bleed out slowly, to make it look like a ritual killing or a deranged assault. Now, there was no time. She worked faster, her hands slick with sweat under the gloves. When it was done, she stepped back, breathing hard, staring at what she had done. It wasn't anger she felt, or even guilt. It was control. Power. For the first time in her life, she controlled the outcome. She stripped off her gloves, cleaned the surfaces, and stuffed the surgical tools back into the case. The evidence was spotless. Years of practice had honed her to precision. In the mirror, she caught her own reflection, the flawless bride in a blood-splattered gown. Her heart rate slowed as her mind switched from executioner to escape artist. She changed into a sleek black dress, tied her hair back, and wiped every surface one last time. Then she pulled a small envelope from her purse and left it on the dresser. It contained a fake confession, a note written in block letters that said, "He begged me to do it. I couldn't stand the lies anymore." It would read like the work of a jealous lover or a disturbed intruder. Nothing that could trace back to her. Before she left, she stood over Edward one final time. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered. "You'll be remembered for your generosity, and I'll make sure of that." Then she slipped out the door, wheeling her suitcase quietly down the carpeted corridor. Security cameras caught her at 3:24 a.m., walking briskly toward the elevator. Not running, not hiding, calm, poised, as if she'd simply finished a long night of celebration. But for Edward Lansing, celebration had turned into silence. And by the time the sun rose over the city he had built, the man who once owned half of Chicago was lying in a pool of blood, a wedding ring still glinting on his finger, his empire now in the hands of a woman who never loved him at all. Within hours, his murder would make headlines around the world. And Clara Monroe, the woman in white, would become the most wanted bride in America. The first scream came from a maid named Maria Lopez. It was 9:42 a.m. when she used her master key to enter the presidential suite on the top floor of the JW Marriott. She expected the usual post-wedding mess: champagne bottles, rose petals, maybe a forgotten veil. Instead, she found blood. It pooled beneath the bed like a shadow that had decided to stay. The air was heavy, metallic, and wrong. Edward Lansing's body lay still, pale against the white sheets, his hand half dangling toward the floor as though he'd tried to reach for help that never came. The room looked peaceful at first glance, until her eyes caught the crimson stains across the mattress, the broken champagne flute on the carpet, and the small leather case left half open beside the nightstand. Maria backed out, screaming for security. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Hotel managers flooded the hallway, radios crackling. Guests in robes peeked through their doors, whispering. By 10:30, Chicago PD had sealed off the entire floor, and detectives were already on scene. Detective Maya Cole stepped into the suite first, her gloved hands folded behind her back. A 14-year veteran, she'd seen plenty of violence, but this was different. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was deliberate, controlled. "Where's the bride?" she asked the manager. "Gone," he said nervously. "She checked out at 3:30 this morning. Said her husband was asleep." Maya exchanged a look with her partner, Detective Ryan Hale, who was scanning the room with a crime scene tech's flashlight. 3:30, he muttered. The groom was still alive then. The coroner shook his head. Unlikely. Estimated time of death, between 2 o'clock and 2:30 a.m. Maya crouched beside the body. Edward's wedding ring was still on his hand. His face was oddly calm, almost serene, but what had been done to him wasn't something she'd seen outside of war crimes. She exhaled slowly. Someone wanted him humiliated. Ryan found the envelope on the dresser. "Note," he said, holding it up. "Block letters. No fingerprints." Maya read it aloud. "He begged me to do it. I couldn't stand the lies anymore." "Too clean," she said. "Too rehearsed." Ryan nodded. "The wife writes this, walks out calmly, and vanishes? Yeah, something's off." They watched the security footage next. The cameras caught everything, except what mattered most. At 2:17 a.m., a man in a room service uniform appeared at the door with a covered tray. He knocked twice, waited, then left. At 3:24, Clara Monroe, now Mrs. Lansing, exited the room wearing a sleek black dress, her hair pulled into a bun. She rolled a small suitcase behind her and stopped in front of the elevator. She didn't look frantic. She didn't cry. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. Ryan leaned back in his chair. That's not the face of a woman who panicked. That's someone who finished something. Maya rewound the footage again, watching frame by frame. Check the guest list. Anyone matching that room service uniform? The hotel manager shook his head. "We didn't have anyone on duty at that hour." "So he's not staff?" Maya said. "Then who the hell was he?" By early afternoon, the press had caught wind. Billionaire found dead after lavish wedding. Helicopters swarmed overhead. Reporters camped outside the Marriott. The story spread like wildfire, a fairy tale turned nightmare. Down in the hotel conference room, Maya and Ryan began piecing together the last 24 hours. Clara's background check came back thin, too thin. No criminal record, no family listed, a vague resume with nonprofit work, but no verifiable address. The Social Security number traced to a woman who had died in Florida 5 years earlier. She's a ghost, Ryan said. Someone who built an entire life out of nothing. Maya nodded, and she played it perfectly. No forced entry, no struggle, no prints. She walks away clean, leaves a note, and disappears. Ryan rubbed his temple. What's the motive? Money? Revenge? She already had everything. Maya stared at the photo of Clara from the wedding, radiant, elegant, almost angelic. Not everything, she said quietly. Maybe she wanted control. Just then, an officer entered the room with a tablet. You should see this. TSA flagged her name at O'Hare. She boarded a flight at 6:12 a.m., private charter, destination unlisted. Maya's eyes narrowed. Private jet? Who signed the manifest? Anonymous corporation out of the Caymans. Charter paid in cryptocurrency. Ryan whistled. That's sophistication. Not some lovesick wife. That's organized. Maya leaned forward. Then she's done this before. She looked again at the still image from the security camera. Clara in her black dress, eyes fixed on the lens, a faint smirk on her lips as the elevator door slid shut. That image would haunt Chicago for weeks, the runaway bride of Michigan Avenue. But for Maya Cole, it wasn't just a mystery. It was personal. There was something about Clara's eyes, not fear, not guilt, but recognition. As the detectives packed up the evidence, Maya whispered to herself, You knew we'd be watching, didn't you? Outside, the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the city in a dark orange haze. The honeymoon suite upstairs had gone silent again, sealed with police tape. And somewhere beyond the clouds, aboard a private jet slicing through the dawn, Clara Monroe lifted a glass of champagne to her lips, watching Chicago shrink beneath her. She didn't smile this time. She didn't need to. She'd already won. The morning after Edward Lansing's autopsy, Detective Maya Cole sat in the fluorescent chill of Chicago PD's Homicide Division, nursing a stale cup of coffee that tasted like metal and fatigue. The city outside was already waking to the sound of sirens and news anchors replaying the same headlines. Runaway bride turns murderer. But Maya knew the story was only half written. Her name's not real, she said, dropping a folder onto her partner, Ryan Hale's desk. Clara Monroe doesn't exist. Ryan flipped through the file, a jumble of forged documents, rental applications, and tax IDs. Then who the hell did we bury? Maya shook her head. No birth record. No credit history before 2020. The Social Security number belongs to a woman who died in a boating accident in Tampa 5 years ago. Ryan frowned. So she stole her identity? More than that, Maya said. She built a new one from scratch. Over the next few hours, their investigation widened. Clara's nonprofit, Haven Hearts Foundation, had no registered staff, no physical office, and a single bank account that funneled millions in so-called donations to offshore accounts, all under false names. But one pattern caught Maya's eye. Each transaction was for exactly $999,999, just under the $1 million threshold that triggered federal reporting laws. Every month, for over a year, Ryan whistled. Smart. Keeps it invisible to financial watchdogs. Maya nodded grimly. Too smart for a solo operator. That evening, she met Samuel Drake, Edward's longtime business partner, in a quiet cafe near the river. The man looked exhausted, guilt written deep in the lines of his face. I told him, Samuel said, voice low. I told Edward something was wrong with her. He didn't believe me. Maya leaned forward. What made you suspicious? He hesitated. I hired a private investigator a month before the wedding. He traced Clara back 5 years, and then nothing. Before that, it's like she vanished off the map. No driver's license, no medical records, no old addresses. He rubbed his temples. I confronted Edward the night before the ceremony. He thought I was jealous. Said love makes people new again. Do you still have the PI's file? Samuel nodded. I'll send it. But detective, he paused, lowering his voice. The investigator found one more thing. Before she was Clara Monroe, she used the name Nina Vale. And before that, Ariel West. She was arrested in Georgia for identity theft. Sir time. Released early. Maya's pulse quickened. How early? Too early, Samuel said. Apparently, she was part of some kind of rehabilitation program. By midnight, Maya and Ryan were deep inside the archives, digging through federal databases. And there it was, Ariel West, convicted of wire fraud and impersonation, sentenced to 10 years in a Georgia correctional facility. Released after 2. Released under seal, Maya murmured, scanning the record. And her parole officer? Federal clearance level 4. Ryan frowned. That's not parole. That's recruitment. They shared a look. Something far bigger than a lover's revenge was unfolding. Maya dug deeper. The earliest mugshot showed a woman with the same face, slightly younger, hair shorter, eyes just as sharp. The file included a redacted note. Subject demonstrated high aptitude for infiltration and psychological manipulation. She was trained, Maya said quietly. Whoever released her didn't want her rehabilitated. They wanted her useful. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Useful for what? A con ring. Maybe something darker. The next morning, FBI analysts joined the task force. Their liaison, Agent Victor Kane, strode into the briefing room with a folder marked classified. I can't share everything, he began, but here's what you need to know. Clara Monroe, real name Ariel West, was part of a covert federal program called Project Chimera. It was designed to infiltrate financial and political corruption networks. Operatives were recruited from prisons, given new identities, and sent into high-risk circles. Ryan's jaw tightened. You turned criminals into spies? Kane didn't flinch. It worked, until it didn't. 3 operatives went dark in the last 2 years. One of them was Ariel. Maya crossed her arms. So you lost control of her, and now we've got a dead billionaire on our hands. Kane's silence was answer enough. Later that night, Maya stood by the river, the city glittering behind her. She replayed the evidence in her mind. The fake note, the offshore accounts, the anonymous jet, the missing operative. Edward Lansing wasn't just a victim of love or greed. He'd stumbled into something far more dangerous, a secret built on lies and betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. You're asking the right questions, detective. But be careful who you ask them to. Maya froze, staring at the words. Then another line appeared. They're already watching you. She looked up instinctively. Across the dark water, a black sedan idled at the curb. Engine running, headlights off. When she blinked, it was gone. Back at headquarters, she pinned Clara's photos to the evidence board. Below them, she scrawled a single line across the whiteboard in red marker. Who made her? The question hung there like a warning. Because somewhere in the maze of forged identities and dead lovers, Maya knew the answer wasn't just about one woman. It was about a system powerful enough to create monsters and careless enough to set them free. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It streaked down the tall windows of Chicago PD like cold sweat, turning the skyline into a smear of silver and gray. Detective Maya Cole sat at her desk long past midnight, replaying the same footage over and over again. Clara Monroe, in her black dress, glancing at the security camera before disappearing into the elevator. Every time Maya paused the video, she felt the same thing, a strange, unshakable pull. That look on Clara's face, confident, almost taunting, wasn't just the stare of a murderer. It was the stare of someone sending a message. She didn't have to wait long to receive it. At 12:47 a.m., the phone on her desk rang. Unknown number. Cole, she answered. A pause, and then a woman's voice, calm and deliberate. Detective Maya Cole. You're good. Better than most. Maya froze. Clara, names are tricky, aren't they? The voice chuckled softly. But yes, let's go with that. Maya's pulse quickened. Where are you? I'd asked the same thing, Clara replied. You've been circling me for days, yet you still don't understand the board you're standing on. You killed Edward Lansing, Maya said sharply. You drugged him, mutilated him, and ran. Is that what your file says? Clara's tone was almost amused. Edward wasn't a saint. He was a variable that got out of hand. A man who wanted to control what was never his to own. Maya's jaw tightened. You sound like someone justifying murder. I'm not justifying anything. I'm explaining inevitability. Then explain it to a judge. Another small laugh. Oh, detective, you still think there's a court for this? The line went quiet for a moment, except for the faint hum of static. Maya could hear her own breath. Then Clara spoke again, her tone shifting, softer now, tinged with exhaustion. I was part of something you'll never find in your databases, she said. A system that creates ghosts and calls them patriots. Project Chimera. Ring a bell? Maya's stomach dropped. So it's real. It's alive, Clara corrected. Edward found out. He wanted to use me. Thought he could turn me in, cut a deal, buy his way into immunity. But men like him don't understand what kind of fire they're holding. So you killed him. No, Clara said sharply. He wasn't supposed to die. I was supposed to disappear. They changed the rules that night. Someone else came into that room. Maya's brow furrowed. Someone else? You really think I'd make that kind of mess and smile at the camera on my way out? Clara paused, her voice low. That smile wasn't for guilt. It was for the person watching, the one who set me up. Who? Clara ignored the question. They call it correction through exposure. They take people like me, erase our names, and turn us into weapons. When we stop following orders, they clean up the evidence. Maya's hand trembled slightly on the receiver. Why tell me this? Because you're the only one who doesn't owe them anything yet. Who's them? You'll know soon enough. Clara, listen to me. Too late, Clara interrupted. They've already tagged your line. Look outside. Maya turned toward the window. Across the street, a black SUV idled with its headlights off, the same make and model she'd seen the night before by the river. Who are they? She demanded. But the line crackled. O'Hare, Clara whispered. Hangar 13. If you want the truth, come alone. The call cut out. By the time Maya and Ryan Hale reached O'Hare, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. The private jet hangars sat at the far end of the tarmac. Empty, quiet, bathed in pale morning fog. They approached Hangar 13 cautiously, flashlights slicing through the dark. The door was slightly ajar, a soft metallic creak echoing with every gust of wind. Inside sat a sleek white Gulfstream, engines humming. A lone figure stood at the base of the stairs. Clara Monroe, dressed in black slacks and a gray coat, her hair tied back. She looked different now, older, colder, and somehow freer. Don't move, Maya shouted, drawing her weapon. Clara raised her hands, but didn't flinch. I'm not here to fight. Then stop running. Maya yelled. You can still come in, tell your story. I already did, Clara said. You just don't believe it yet. A voice boomed from behind them. Step away from a suspect. Maya turned. FBI agents swarmed the hangar, led by Agent Victor Kane. What the hell is this? Maya demanded. Kane's expression was unreadable. This is federal now. Clara smirked. Of course it is. Kane lifted a hand toward his team, and in that moment, Clara took a step backward up the stairs. You should be careful who you trust, detective, she called. They clean up their own messes, and you're standing in one. The plane's door closed. Engines roared to life. Maya lunged forward, shouting, No, don't let her go. But Kane didn't move. The agent stood still, as if following a script they already knew. The jet lifted into the pale morning sky, slicing through the fog until it vanished completely. Maya stared after it, breathless, fury boiling under her skin. You let her escape, she said to Kane. He met her gaze, voice flat. She wasn't escaping. She was leaving. For what? Kane turned away. For good. Back at headquarters, Maya replayed the security footage from the hangar. The brief glance Clara gave her before the plane took off. It wasn't mockery this time. It was warning. Beneath it, a single text appeared on Maya's encrypted phone. They'll come for you next. When they do, follow the money. And with that, Clara Monroe, the ghost bride, the con artist, the spy, vanished into thin air once again. The morning after the hangar incident, the Chicago skyline looked different. Maybe it was the heavy fog, or maybe it was the weight of everything Detective Maya Cole now knew but couldn't prove. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Clara Monroe, calm, unflinching, vanishing into the fog while the FBI just watched. The official report called it an unauthorized civilian departure under federal supervision. In other words, a cover-up. But Maya had seen enough to know that Project Chimera wasn't some conspiracy theory. It was real, and it was rotten to the core. At 9 a.m., Maya and Detective Ryan Hale sat across from Agent Victor Kane in an FBI field office conference room that smelled like coffee and deception. A screen glowed at the front, displaying the words, Project Chimera, classified, level alpha. "You owe me an explanation," Maya said coldly. Kane clasped his hands, his expression the picture of bureaucratic calm. "Detective Cole, you were never meant to be involved in this case. What happened to Edward Lansing falls under federal jurisdiction now." "You mean you're cleaning it up?" Kane's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "I saw her," Maya snapped. "I talked to her. Clara said Lansing was going to expose something. You think I'm just going to forget that?" Kane sighed. Edward Lansing was a financier for multiple shell corporations tied to political lobbying and covert research contracts. The same web we planted Ariel West, your Clara, Monroe into. Her mission was to gather data, expose laundering networks, and identify corrupt officials. Expose. Ryan cut in. She killed him. Kane didn't flinch. Lansing's death was collateral, a complication, but you'll find that his death was convenient for more people than her. Maya leaned forward. "You used her. You made her a ghost, and then tried to erase her when she stopped following orders." Kane stared at her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice low. "You're not wrong. Chimera was built on control, psychological, financial, operational. We recruited criminals because they were expendable. No records, no families, no questions. So what went wrong?" Kane's jaw tightened. "You met her. She stopped being controllable." 2 hours later, Maya sat alone in her car, overlooking the river, the city reflected on its restless surface. She turned over every word in her mind. Clara wasn't just a manipulator. She was the mirror image of the people who created her. The perfect infiltrator turned unpredictable variable. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Maya's phone buzzed. A private number. She hesitated, then answered. No voice this time, just static, and then a faint female whisper. "Follow the money." Then the call cut out. Within seconds, her inbox flooded, encrypted files, one after another, labeled Chimera Unifocusing for 1, Chimera for 2, evidence of her site. She opened the first file, spreadsheets, wire transfers, internal memos linking senators, CEOs, and law enforcement officials to offshore accounts tied to Project Chimera shell corporations. It was explosive. Ryan arrived minutes later, out of breath. "Maya, tell me you're not opening that stuff." She turned the laptop toward him. "It's not just corruption, Ryan. It's human experimentation. They were testing neuroconditioning methods on inmates, turning them into obedient assets. Clara was one of the prototypes." Ryan went pale. "Christ. She wasn't supposed to survive," Maya said quietly. "But she did. And she remembered. By midnight, the files had already gone public. Someone, Clara, had uploaded everything to a dozen international servers with time-release encryption keys. The media called it the Chimera leak. Within 24 hours, headlines blazed across the country. Federal program turns inmates into assassins. Senators, CEOs implicated in Chimera scandal. Anonymous source leaks top secret files. The government scrambled to contain the fallout. The FBI disavowed any connection, while the Department of Defense launched an internal investigation. But it was too late. The world had seen behind the curtain. And Clara Monroe, the woman they had created, used, and discarded, had burned the whole theater down. Weeks passed. Edward Lansing's murder trial was quietly closed. Cause of death: homicide by unknown assailant. His empire collapsed within days. His daughter Elena sold off the properties, vowing to never live another day under a roof my father built. Maya Cole was reassigned, officially for operational fatigue. In truth, she had stepped on too many powerful toes. But she didn't care. Every night, she looked out over the city and thought about the voice on the other end of that phone. Sometimes, she swore she saw her, a woman in a red coat, walking across the bridge just before dawn. 3 months later, a brown envelope arrived at Maya's apartment. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note written in the same neat handwriting she'd seen in Edward's files. They built monsters, detective. But they forgot one thing. Monsters remember who made them. Maya loaded the drive. A single video file appeared. Clara sat in an undisclosed location. Dark hair pulled back, eyes calm, the faint sound of wind behind her. "If you're seeing this," she began, "then they've lost control. For years, they told us we were tools, that we were serving something greater. But all we served was greed. Edward thought he could outplay the system. He was wrong. I didn't kill him. I finished what they started." She leaned closer to the camera. "Project Chimera still exists. You can't destroy a system built on secrets, but you can expose it. That's what I've done. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm everywhere." The video flickered, then ended on a single frame. The reflection of Maya's own face in Clara's eyes, as if she had filmed it knowing Maya would be the one to watch. 2 weeks later, the Washington Post published an article. "Whistleblower behind Chimera leaks still at large." The closing paragraph quoted an anonymous source claiming the operative had resurfaced somewhere in Europe, continuing her mission. But Maya knew better. Clara Monroe wasn't hiding in Europe. She was everywhere there were cameras, bank systems, and shadows to slip through. The woman who had once been Ariel West had become a phantom, the ghost that haunted every corrupt institution built on silence. And as Maya stood by the river that night, wind whipping through the lights of Chicago, she finally understood what Clara meant when she said she was a mirror. Because when the world looked into her eyes, it didn't just see a criminal. It saw itself.